Hello and welcome to a presentation of all the new features of VCarve Pro version 9.5. Before we move on to individual demonstrations, let's take a summary look at all the new features that have been added. As you can see, VCarve Pro contains the majority of features that have been developed for version 9.5 and are broadly grouped into key areas such as infrastructure, job type, drawing, modeling and machining, and we've got a good spread of improvements across all these key areas. Whether that be the automatic download and entering of your license code to get your software working, the addition of a completely new job type for Rotary, some significant improvements to text creation and editing within drawing, as well as the new picture editor and the ability to crop a bitmap to a vector, some significant improvements to the way we import Rotary models and the ability to export that wrapped entity as a true wrapped model. Some significant improvements to the way we work with rotary based machining, as well as the new support for helical ramps. As part of our expansion of cloud-based services, we've introduced the ability to automatically download and enter your registered username and license code in order to get your software working. Now previously with version 9.5, at worst you'd have to manually type in that registered username and license code, or at best be able to copy and paste that from an email you may have received. However, with version 9.5, when connected to your customer account V&Co, the license can be automatically downloaded in order to get your software working. If you don't have internet connection, you can still use the manual typed option. So with that, let's start a session of the software. And immediately you'll get this message, as this is the first time we started it. Do I want to enter my details through online or manual entry? So I'm going to go online. I'll then be prompted to log in to my V&Co account. This will direct to portal.vectric.com login page. I'm going to enter my email address and the password which I created when I accepted the invitation to the account. And once I've directed in now, so that's validated that, I then will get the message pop up on the screen that the software has been licensed to Joe Bloggs Vectric, which is my registered username, and hit the finish button and my software starts. In version 9.5 we significantly improved the way we manage our clip art. In version 9 you'd have to install the clip art directly from the installation script contained on your USB stick, or alternatively each of the separate executables from your V&Co account. In both cases this would take considerable time and use up a lot of disk space. However, with version 9.5, if you don't install all the clip art, you'll still be presented with all that's available and you can download those items as and when required. And of course this has future scope to link across to purchasable clip art from our sister company Design and Make. If we look at some visual comparisons here, in version 9 you can see that you can install the clip art directly from the installation script on the USB stick, or alternatively each of the separate executables from your V&Co account. But once again, in both cases can take considerable time and considerable disk space. In version 9.5 you'll still be presented with all the available clip art and you can download it as and when required. So with that, let's show how that works. So I'm just going to start a session of the software now and a new file and go straight to my clip art and go down for instance to objects and people here, and I'm presented with the available clip art in this section. Some items have already been downloaded. You can see that because there is no download icon in the bottom right hand corner, whereas the ones below that bottle cap you can see there is a download icon in the bottom right hand corner showing that it needs to be downloaded before it can be used. So with that now I can right mouse key and go download. Okay, it will ask me to log in to my V&Co account, so I'm going to get the portal.vectric login page will come up, and I'm going to log in now with my email address and my password and sign in. Okay, that's linked across now. So with that, the item has now been downloaded and I can simply move that into the part space. Or alternatively now, if I've already connected, I can just simply paste that across and it will download and get pasted into the job at the same time. If I close the software now and restart it, so my connection is still there. So if I go now to start another part and introduce more clip art, for instance, I'm now going to add in these flowers. It won't prompt me. It would also automatically download and import because I'm already connected to my V&Co account. Further to the improvements to Rotary, we've made some big changes to the way we import models, and in particular Rotary-based models. In version 9 there was no specific workflow for Rotary, and it was often difficult to orientate the model before beginning the unwrap. But the biggest problem was having to judge the scale of the model in order to fit within the block, given the fact that you had to consider the unwrap dimensions. Now with version 9.5, the import process has been completely rewritten to only display the relevant parameters. You have two options, one for a full 3D model and the other one for a flat base model. There is automatic initial orientation, so it will bring the component and orientate it given the axis that you've selected for the rotary. There's a special blue bounding cylinder which helps you orientate your model towards the block. There's automatic scaling to fit. A really big plus is the ability to scale the model to fit the block, so this process will calculate the unwrap dimensions and ensure your model is scaled correctly to fit the block. And it's very easy to manipulate the rotation axis to ensure that runs through the model, so that when we unwrap the model we get exactly what we need. The biggest changes to version 9.5 have certainly come within the world of rotary jobs. In version 9 this was a gadget only function, and it made it very difficult to make job modifications once you've created the initial setup. And you had no ability to sort of combine spiral and cylindrical wrap layouts in one job by the nature of the form, selecting either one or the other. In version 9.5 you no longer require a gadget for the job setup. There's a new dedicated workflow, so a new job type. It's far easier to edit job parameters after the initial creation, as you can just return back to the form. You can combine spiral and cylindrical layouts within the same job, and of course we have made sure that those jobs created with the gadget can be reopened within the new job layout. Okay, so if we move through to look at some visual differences between V9 and V9.5, you can see on the left hand side there is only two types of job types, single-sided and double-sided. There is no rotary. That rotary was only accessible through a gadget menu. So from the top menu, gadgets, wrapping, wrap job setup, which would then bring up this form we see here, where you're specifying the length, diameter, the rotation axis, and whether you want either a cylindrical wrap or a spiral wrap, not a combination of both. In version 9.5 you can see that we have a new job type, that rotary, that's been added underneath the single-sided and double-sided, and upon selection you get dedicated parameters for a rotary job setup. So the length there, the diameter of the stock, whether your zero position is on the top of the stock or in the central axis, the same XY datum position. You've got this orientation as to whether you are orientated along the x-axis, therefore wrapping the y values, or along the y-axis wrapping the x values. So this is a new form here and a new job type. Okay, I mentioned also about the ability to combine spiral and cylindrical jobs together. You can see in version 9 you either selected a cylindrical wrap or a spiral wrap, but in the new version here you can everything is a cylindrical wrap, but you have the option to for a dedicated level to be able to switch on wrapping, so you can take a simple sort of unwrapped relief and then obviously multiple wrap it round, in this case creating a very simple sort of lamp stand where the lower half is a wrapped relief and the upper half is a standard fluting toolpath. So there we have a job that combines both of those. In terms of display, there's been some huge changes too. in VCarve Pro you could not view the wrapped relief for 2D jobs, and you cannot view the wrapped simulation. The only thing you could visualize is the wrapped toolpath. So it meant there was sort of visual disparity between the simulation and the toolpath. Also, when wrapping that toolpath, the seam would appear facing you rather than the center of the workpiece. Therefore, quite often you had to try and rotate the model back in order to be able to see the toolpath, which made it, not particularly easy to work with. And you couldn't visualize the model inside the cylindrical stock. You could only see the block as if the item was unwrapped rather than the wrapped cylindrical stock. In version 9.5, you can view the wrap relief for 2D jobs, and you can view the wrapped toolpath simulation. So you've got all three things there: the wrapped relief itself, the wrapped simulation, and the wrapped toolpath. And it will automatically wrap that relief for a rotary job. You've got new dedicated icons on the top toolbar to be able to switch wrapping on and off rather than accessing through the toolpath drawing option. You can, as stated, you can open jobs that have previously been created with gadgets in previous versions. And when creating, for instance, some text in the center of a piece, when that's wrapped, the center of the workpiece will be facing you on the screen rather than the seam, so it makes far better sense to see the center of the job facing you. And of course, since we're able to see the cylindrical stock, it makes it far easier to visualize this around the component that you're actually working with. We're going to take a look at a couple of different examples. This is one we're simply going to do here, which is to put some Vectric text on a block. If we look to what happens in version 9 on the left hand side, you can see that when we go to wrap the toolpath, we can see that in the second of the two images on the left hand side, we see that wrapped relief, but wrapped toolpath, but not the wrapped model. And when we do wrap the toolpath, we are looking as if we are looking at the seam, the wrapped seam. So in this case, rather than the Vectric facing you, it seems to be on the back side. And of course, when you go to simulate it, you see the simulation in the flat version with the wrapped toolpath, so the sort of disparity between the two. However, in 9.5, as soon as you go to create the toolpath here, you'll see that the toolpath is facing you clearly in the center of the screen, so not the seam. You have icons to switch off the wrapping. You also have new icons to rotate the stock round to be able to see the other side if required, and you can see here that the simulation and the toolpath are in situ together. We'll also take a look at this example here where we're going to wrap some relief around a fairly simple cylinder, and in version 9 we can visualize the relief or the clip art only in the wrapped toolpath version. So in terms of model we can't see it, the raw toolpath and the simulation, so the only option we have is to see the wrapped toolpath. Whereas in version 9.5 we can see the complete wrapped clip art around the cylinder, and we can see the wrapped simulation, and we can see the wrapped toolpath. So it's far easier for us to visualize the complete model, to see that in situ, to see the block and how it fits with the components themselves, and it's just a far better way to work with version 9.5. Okay, so we have a new session of VCarve Pro 9.5. I'm going to go straight ahead and create a new file. No need to go to gadgets. Go straight up to my form here and select rotary, length 20, diameter 3, and I'm going to, just like we did before, select the orientation along the y-axis, so essentially wrapping the x values. Okay, and I'm just going to OK that now. And just like we did with version 9, I want to make some changes to this. I now need to work with a 5-inch diameter rather than 3-inch. Well, that's very, very easy now. I can simply come up to here, change the diameter, and that will dynamically update. And also I want to change the orientation. I've noticed actually on my machine that the rotation axis is parallel to my x-axis, therefore I want to wrap the y values, and I can simply OK that. Go straight ahead now and add some text. So in this case you can see the new text tool, so I'm going to enter that somewhere in the middle of the screen. OK, and close that and just center that now. Go straight to machining, straight to the profile, and we're going to use the same thing and calculate, and immediately you see the wrap job and the wrap toolpath on the screen, and I can simulate that now and we can see that all together. So that's the wrap job and the toolpath simulation all coming together. So it's there's been a lot of improvements, both in terms of adding in a completely new job type, but also the way we work with it in terms of the workflow and the way different items have been displayed. So now we're going to move on and look at a different example. Okay, so the next example we're going to look at is a simple wrapping of some clip art around a cylinder. And once again, in order to highlight the differences, we're going to do the same presentation in version 9 and version 9.5. Okay, we have a new session of 9.5 open. I'm going to go straight ahead now and create a new file that's 20-inch and 5-inch diameter. So I'm now ready to begin using the clip art. But before I do so, I'm aware that obviously we had the ability to create the special spiral vector to help obviously locate the clip art in version 9. That's currently not available in 9.5, although will be written in the future. So I would suggest that you output the wrapped output sort of vector from version 9 and then import that into 9.5, which is exactly what I'm going to do here. So we've got the wrapped output, which came from running the original gadget in V9. I'm now going to go to my clip art, go down to the weaves, pick out the one that we used in V9, and it's automatically told me that do I want to modify the sort of zero plane. So it's automatically going to create the zero plane and modify that so that we're maximizing the amount of stock to fill the 5-inch diameter. So I'm going to go yes on that, and immediately if I flip now to the 3D view, you can see there's our clip art that's been added on top. And if I actually move across to machining now and have a look at the stock, you can see the stock and the plane has been calculated to actually allow a little bit of space here for the clip art that's been added, but it's maximizing that 5-inch diameter stock. So if I then just cancel out of there, and we'll go back to the modeling tab so we can see and get away from the 3D view. So that's our standard unwrap view. We're going to go back to the 2D now and further manipulate the clip art. So with that, I'm going to just change the size, sort of dynamically pick that up and just rotate it round as we did before, and quickly then just obviously link this all together. So control and pick that up, and once again pick that up. I'm not being particularly careful here since we're just demoing this. And now pick those items together and just link them all. And just make sure they're aligned first. So align to the left, and then just right mouse key group those objects. And you'll notice in the modeling menu that we've also already got the zero plane that's been calculated and added, whereas that was a manual process that we had to do with version 9. I'm going to create a new level and move my weave into that level now and just rotate it into position. So I'm going to rotate that now roughly into somewhere like so. So I'm happy that that's falling through there. And if I go to my 3D view now, we can see that, okay? And if I'm going to show that as wrapped, it's wrapped round but not all the way round. So it's just done what it can see basically from the unwrapped state. Okay, whereas actually we'd like to continue this round and round. Well, this is where we've got the option now to set a wrap to a particular level. So I'm going to go and right mouse key over the level now and set this level to be wrapping. So immediately you can see that's wrapped that clipper all the way round now, and as a result, when I go to my fully wrapped view, I get exactly as expected. Okay, so that's quite nice that we can have basically a standard sort of cylindrical wrap, but have one level that's dedicated to being a spiral wrap, essentially. I can go straight across now to machining, and simply you can see then that stock in situ with the model, which is great for visualization. And I'm going to OK that and come through to the finish machining and quickly calculate a very crude toolpath here so we can see the simulation. So there we are immediately presented with the wrapped toolpath rather than flat toolpath, but of course I can go back to the flat view if required, and we can see that toolpath there, and then come back to the wrapping, and now I'm going to simulate. So there you can see very quickly we've been able to get from start to finish in version 9.5, both in terms of an easier workflow, the automatic creation of the zero plane and the calculation of its height based upon the other items that we're adding to it, and then of course the automatic wrapping of both the model, the toolpath and the simulation makes working in the rotary space far easier with version 9.5. The final example is to take the model we've just been working with and to modify that to create this sort of lamp stand that we can see on the right hand side. Here we are combining sort of a spiral wrapped clip art during the bottom half of the stand, and then combining that with a standard cylindrical fluted layout for the top half with a little band in the middle separating it. So for that we're going to jump into the last session of VCarve Pro 9.5 and modify the part. Okay, so we're back inside the last session of VCarve Pro 9.5 with the same part, and we're going to make some modifications in order to create the lamp stand that we were looking at on the slides. I don't need this wrapped vector, and before I do anything I'm just going to rotate the original clip art round to roughly vertical and just move that out of the way. Now considering the lower half is going to be wrapped and the upper half is going to be a fluted toolpath, I'm just going to create some construction geometry roughly off the middle and coming up vertically, okay, as so. And I'm going to expand my clip art. My idea here really is to try and create basically clip art that intertwines on itself so it looks like a complete wrapped relief around it, even though essentially it's a spiral that happens to be merging together. So I'm just going to come in now and just widen that up, okay, and I'm now going to rotate that. So I'm going to rotate that like so, and we're just going to move that into position, and basically I'm going to probably extend that up now. So we've got something like that, and maybe just move it down. So I'm pretty happy with that at that point, and let's go and have a look at the 3D view now. So you can see that that's been updated. I might need to just shift it a little bit to the right hand side. Okay, so let's just expand that up a little bit and then just move that across. Okay, so we should get quite a nice effect there. Okay, so you can see that's sort of wrapped all the way around there. I'm quite pleased with that. But I now need to add a sort of a base and a sort of differentiating band towards the top region that we're going to be doing the fluting on. So with that I'm going to go back to my clip art now and read in some, well actually it's a 3D tab here, this circular one. So that's going to come in quite small, and I'm just going to rotate that now through 90 degrees. And just expand it. I'm going to have it roughly around about that wide, and I'm now going to just center that, so we'll just center that in the middle of the workpiece and expand that. Okay, so we're going to just expand that up and to the bottom as well. Whoops, I've just moved that, so I just come back and scale that down. Okay, and I'm just going to go to my modeling tab here, and I'm going to differentiate between the weave and the sort of circular shapes. So I'm just going to create a new level now and move that circular shape up, and I'm going to change the height of that to be 0.3. Okay, so that's going to be 0.3 in height, and I'm just going to change the weave now and make sure that's fine at 0.16. I'll make it actually 0.175 just to round things up, and I'm just going to go to the 3D view now, and we can see here that it's currently wrapping on top. That's because the combine mode of my level is not correct, so I'm going to set that to merge now. Okay, so that will change that there, and what I will do is I'll just slightly expand that bit in the middle. So we're just going to take that now and just slightly expand it, and I'll just go back to the 3D view, and you can see that's taking care of that. I'm now going to take the same thing and copy that band down to the bottom. So I'm just going to eyeball this time, although I could. So I'm going to just, with my control key down and the item selected, just basically place it somewhere like so. And we can have a look at the 3D view now, and we've added a base there. Okay. So with that, I'm quite happy with the lower half here. I've got that sort of quite neat weave that's been added. It looks completely tiled, but essentially that's just a spiraled bit of clip art that happens to be merging together. So the next stage is to go ahead and do the fluting. So we're going to go back to the 2D view now. Okay, and I'm going to add in some vectors here. So I'm just going to close out the form. Now, we would normally have access to use the fluting gadget in 9.5, which still remains. So I'm going to go up to the fluting layout here. Okay, and we want a number of flutes. So in this case, we're going to go 5. Okay, and the offset from the start. Bearing in mind this is 20 inches, the middle is 10, 11, so maybe around about 11.5, and then of course we want to be an offset from the end of around 1 inch as well. So we'll OK that, and that's created the vectors that we see on the screen. We don't need these two end ones here, and I'm going to select those vectors, and we're now going to create a toolpath to form that fluted detail at the top of the stand. Now, when I move across to the machining, I have to be aware of what the height of the cylinder is in that position. Now, bearing in mind our zero plane automatically adjusts, and our maximum clip art height is 0.3. Okay, we're dealing with, if we go back to our block size, we can see we're dealing with a 5-inch diameter, therefore it's 2.5 radius. We've got 0.3, so basically that's 2.2 is the height here. So really what we want to do now is when we come to create our fluting toolpath, okay, so we're going to go to the fluting here, and we're going to set the start depth at 0.3, okay. So that's 0.3 down, bearing in mind our height of our relief is 0.3, and our fluting depth thereafter would be, say, 0.2. Okay, we're going to use a large ball nose ball, so I'm going to just simply copy this 1/4 inch and just change it to a 1 inch and the diameter to 1, and we'll set the depth to say 0.25 and OK that, and simply calculate that toolpath now. Okay, so I'm just going to reset the preview because that was the one that we had from before, and just play that so we can immediately see the fluting that has been added. Okay, with that I now need to obviously consider the toolpath for the lower half. So we're going to go back to the, we're going to close out from the simulation and go into our standard 3D finishing. And once again, this isn't going to be particularly efficient because I will be running the tool over the top half as well. So I'm just going to go with my 1/4 inch ball nose, and I'm going to raster and calculate that toolpath. So we'll quickly simulate all the toolpaths now. So there we can see the upper half has the fluted toolpath, and then the lower half has the spiral weave separated with a band around the middle and a small base. So it just shows really the improvements that have been added to 9.5, which allow us to combine this spiral wrapped layout at the lower half with another region that happens to be fluted, for instance, or could be a different method altogether. For version 9.5 there are significant improvements to the way text is created and edited. If we look back to version 9, you would only ever see the text placed on the screen after completing the entries in the form. There was no dynamic modification, so if you're changing, for instance, the height or the justification, then you would need to apply that in order to see the effect on the screen. And also any transformations to the text would be reset when editing the text content. For instance, if you'd rotated the text, scaled it, mirrored it, etc., and then wanted to make a change, those changes were all lost and the text was presented in its original location. Whereas for 9.5, when you start by clicking on the screen, which will show a text box showing its start position, its height and its alignment, and the text would begin to be displayed as soon as you enter the first character. So we can see also we have dynamic modification. If you're changing the font or the height, then that will immediately be updated on the screen without having to apply. And most importantly is any transformations to the text are maintained when editing the text content, and that applies when rotating the text, whether you've wrapped it along a curve, whether you've modified its kerning, also some non-proportional scaling or mirroring. That's all maintained if you go ahead and edit that text at a later point. Okay, so we've got the same part in version 9.5, and like we did with version 9, we'll take a look at some of the simple fundamental issues that we have and see whether these have been remedied with version 9.5. Now I'm going to go to the draw text function, and you can immediately see here it's given me a location for where that text is going to start, and wherever I click you can see that I've got a text box representing the text alignment, whether that's right, center or middle. You can see that's being changed dynamically on the screen there. And you've got the height, so if I change that to say 2, you can see that immediately being updated on the screen, and back down to say 1, and you can see that location being placed. So immediately after that, I don't have to come up to the text entry text box. I can simply start typing canoe and we'll see the letters on the screen. Great. So now, as we did before, I'm going to just mid-flow, which is nice here, I'm going to click on that, scale that down now. Okay, I'm happy with that. And then add in ing to create canoeing, and as you can see, that kept that transformation. Now similarly, if I want to rotate that, what we had to do in version 9 was to come out of the text entry, because the transformation box there did not have the rotation anchors, but they are now here, so I can just rotate that and maybe come back in and type in kayak, and as you can see there, it's kept the rotation and the scaling. And similarly with the kerning, that would also be maintained. So you can see it's a big leap forward with the creation and editing of text, because typically we don't always get things right first time, or quite often we like to use templates for text where we then come in and just update the font or update the text entry, particularly if you're making plaques, for instance, where you might have sort of template text that's just edited to be different dates or different names. So I'm just going to delete that out now, and we're going to get rid of that text and come in and look at the sign here itself, and going to create the first word, which is rowing. So I'm going to just plonk that there. You can immediately see that that is the wrong height, so I'm going to change that to 1, and I'm going to add rowing into this location. And similarly, like we did before, I'm just going to shift and pick that outer curve and align to the center of that vector. Now that was simple here. Now we're going to add in the word Salisbury into this region here, as we did with version 9. So straight into the text, I'm just going to say create it down here, and I'm going to type in SALSBURY and close out that form. Going to shift now and pick that out of vector, do the text on a curve, and we're going to align to the curve. We're going to be on the other side, and we need to apply an offset of 0.25. Okay, and we can now see that letters, but the spacing's not quite right, so I'm going to need to increase that up until that is right. Okay, I'm happy with that. Close that out. And just like I did with version 9, I've suddenly realized that I've spelt it incorrectly. So I'm going to come back in now to the text form and just change that L to an I, and that's kept the spacing. and it's just replaced the L with an I. So that is perfect. That saved me a hell of a lot of time. So I'm just going to close out that form. We'll switch on the other text the other side for association, and now I'm going to come up and create my two dates here. So simply come in with the text, place it somewhere around about here, and this is going to be 1934. Immediately I can see it's the wrong height, so I'm just going to change that to 0.8. Okay, and mid-flow I can actually click on it, rotate it, just get it into position. Okay, and just apply a bit more rotation. Okay, I'm happy with that now, and I'm going to copy that and paste it, so Control C, Control V, and just use the 9 on the keyboard to rotate. I'm going to move that now across to here. Okay, and just come back to the draw text function and change that to 2018. And as you can see, we've completed the sign in a much shorter time than we could have done with version 9, given the mistakes that we made along the way. Two new image editing functions that have been added to version 9.5 are the ability to crop an image to a vector and to change its color characteristics. In version 9 there was no ability to crop an image, and also if we wanted to change the brightness, contrast or gamma, there was no way of doing that, and we would have to do that in a third-party software. This becomes particularly important if you're going to create, for instance, a lithophane, or if you're looking to create a suitable image for maybe creating a laser picture toolpath. So with 9.5 these have been added. So we have the ability to change the brightness, contrast and gamma, as well as obviously change it from color to grayscale, and to add a feathered border around it, whether that be rectangular or oval. And as stated before, this is ideal if you're looking to create a lithophane or looking to create a suitable output for a laser picture toolpath. So if we look at the visual differences between the two products, in version 9 you had nothing. There was no ability to crop an image or to change its color characteristics. In version 9.5, under the Edit Objects menu, there are two new functions here, one for cropping and one for the color change. So we can see here in this particular example, which we'll go through here, we've taken an image of a tiger and created a vector around its head, which is then cropped to create the trimmed out version. We've increased the brightness slightly since it's a dull image, changed it to grayscale, and then added a nice feathered border around the outside, and at that point we're happy to move on to maybe using that for a different purpose. So with that, the best way to show this is to go into the software. So I'm going to open version 9.5 and just create a new file, just its width and height of 5, and I'm going to import an image directly into this space. We've got a tiger here, similar to the one we saw in the PowerPoint, and I'm going to create a circle centered somewhere around about there and expanding out. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to close that now and then shift and pick the image, okay, and then use the crop bitmap, which is the new function in the Edit Objects menu, and that will crop the image to the selected vector. Now I want to then scale that up, so I'm going to change its size to be 4, and I'm going to center that using the centering tool here, and we have the cropped image of the tiger's head, centrally located, height and width 4. At that point I do need to want to change some characteristics with the image. So next to the crop bitmap icon is the picture editor, which brings up the form on the left hand side. You can see I can change the contrast, I can change the brightness, and I can change the gamma. Okay, in this case I'm just going to slightly increase the brightness, and I'm going to increase the gamma, and at that point I now want to change it to a grayscale image, so I'm going to change it to grayscale, and given the fact that this is going to be used as a laser picture, so I'm going to just add a border around that, so a feathered edge border, so rather than getting a hard edge, it's a nice soft edge to the effect. In this case I need an oval border, and of course I can change that depending on how much feathering I want. So with that I am happy, and now I have edited my original color picture of the tiger, trimmed it to a vector, and applied some changes to its color characteristics, ready for another operation later down the line. Okay, so to highlight the improvements, let's do the same demonstration in version 9.5. So I'm going to start by creating a new file, no need to use the gadget, selecting the rotary job type, length 25, diameter 4, my cylinder axis is in the center, and we're orientating along the y-axis, i.e. rotating the x values. And I shall OK that form and go straight to the modeling tab and import my table leg.sdl. So initially that's already orientated using front to get it into the same orientation as the block, and I now am aware that the rotation axis as shown by this red line there is not within my model, which would lead to an inaccurate wrap. So I need to address that now. So I'm going to look along the particular view that allows me to then lower that down into the model. Immediately the bounding box resizes, okay, based upon that new rotation axis. But of course I need to fit this bounding box to the stock. So in the lower part of the form here, I'm going to say scale model to fit material. It's a very powerful command here which works out the calculations based upon the unwrapping to ensure my model fits within my block. So scale model to fit material. Of course we do have some extra stock at the end here because 25 was specified as the length, so I'm actually going to have the block automatically resize and then OK that, and we now are presented with the rewrapped model that's been imported. Of course I can, if I want to see that in the unwrapped state. This is the top of the leg and this is the bottom of the leg, and I can then obviously flip back to the wrapped state. So the next stage is really to add on some extra detail before we then move on and create a toolpath. So before doing that, I'm going to create a new level, and within that level we're going to add some clip art. So I'm just going to look down the Z view and go to clip art now and take the flower that we've seen before in the previous one that we did with version 9, and just going to manipulate this now. Okay, so I'm just going to try and position it as we would like, and then we'll mirror it across to the other side. Okay, so that's approximately how I would like it. Back to the drawing tab now, and I'm going to mirror that, create a mirrored copy, flipping around the job center, flip horizontal. Okay, so I'm going to close that now. Now what we need to be aware is, because the unwrapping was extremely accurate and completely fills the block, by the nature of me adding extra clip art now, that's going to bust through the top of the block. And of course you can see that now. If I go to set my material, it's telling me that my model is too big for my stock. So quite rightly I need to reduce the relief. So I'm just going to go back now to my modeling tab, and we can look at the individual bits of clip art, which are roughly around about 0.16 in height. So I'm going to now lower my table leg, okay, to account for that. So I'm going to put this down to 1.84, okay, and now when I come back to my block, we have a little bit of room there. So essentially what I've done there is account for the fact that we've added the extra clip art onto the table leg, so I've needed to reduce that down in order for it to fit within our defined stock size. So I'm happy at that stage, and what's really nice is, of course, is great to visualize that in full 3D wrap. So we can see that clip art that's been added. Okay, and now we can move directly on to create a toolpath. So I'm going to go now to, let's just flatten that out and go back to the 3D finishing now, and we've got a 0.25 inch bore, model boundary, 90 degrees, calculate. So we're going to see that toolpath created. And of course, if we want to see that in the wrap view, we can see that there. I'm just going to change the material now to something more representative and preview all those toolpaths. And there we can see the finished, well, in this case with this particular toolpath, the simulation, a full 3D wrap simulation of that toolpath, so we can see both the original wrap model, the wrap toolpath, and the wrap simulation. So a big improvement over version 9. With version 9.5 there's a significant improvement to the way we handle spiral ramp moves between toolpath profiles. Now in version 9, helical ramps were output as a series of straight line moves. Essentially the spiral ramp would be broken into a lot of straight line segments, which could create a very large G-code file. Whereas for 9.5 those ramps are honoured as arcs, so their output, the output is far smaller file, but it does require an updated post-processor. Now the best way to demonstrate these differences is to output a very simple toolpath using the existing post-processor and a new one that's been adapted for the outputting of arcs. So with that I'm going to start version 9.5 and create a new file 5x5 and simply add a simple circle which will be centered on the job and go straight through to machining. So the material setup very simple, just thickness 0.2, and we've got our clearance heights correct. Moving straight through to the profile toolpath, starting at 0, cut depth 0.1 with a 1/4 inch end mill. Importantly, we're going to switch on the ramps to the toolpath, and I'm going to go for the spiral option and simply calculate. So if we have a look from the side here, you can see the tool is gradually ramping down to the blue toolpath level, so you can see that very clear ramped move down to the toolpath profile. Now if we just simulate that very quickly so you can see that being cut. Okay, and now the next stage is for us to output that using the two different post processors. So let's close out of that form now and go to the save toolpath function. Okay, and I'm just going now to select the standard G-code option. So we're just going to go into the, you can see here that we've got G-code arcs and G-code helical arcs. So I'm going to select the G-code arcs here now, and we've got the arcs in inch, and I'm going to save that. Okay, so we're going to save it onto the desktop. Okay, and this is going to be called no arcs, and we'll save that. Okay, and then we're going to take the same toolpath, so I'm just going to change the post processors now and to use the helical arcs, and we'll save that and we'll put with arcs, and we'll just take a look at the difference between those two toolpaths. So they've now been saved. So I'm going to come across now and just look at the no arcs file. Okay, and we'll just simply open that up into a notepad here, and we can simply see that we have an awful lot of entries into there for what is essentially a simple ramp down to a toolpath profile. So with that I'm just going to close the no arcs one and we'll look at the with arcs, and as you can see there it's a far smaller file correctly output with the arcs to produce a far smaller G-code file. Within machining there's been some significant improvements in the way we manage rotary jobs. New for version 9.5 is support for G93, which means that the rotation speed will vary to maintain a constant feed rate. Therefore you'll get a much better finish quality than you used to do with the no support for G93. Similarly, when outputting the file using a rotary post, you would be originally prompted in version 9 to enter the diameter of the cylinder and enter whether the 0 position on the cylinder was the surface or the center. So you'd still have to add that rather than that being automatically extracted. Well, that's changed for version 9.5, and those parameters are extracted from the job and written into the header of the G-code file. So with that, let's take a look. So I've got a session of VCarve desktop started here, and I'm going to open an existing model. It's one that we saw earlier. So I'm going to switch across to the simulation. There you can see the Vectric text that's going to be engraved, and if we just quickly simulate that, you can see that. So with that, I'm now going to output that using a rotary post. So I'm going to save that toolpath there, and here we're going to be using a wrapped post, which is wrapping the y-axis to the A, which is exactly what we want since this is aligned to the x-axis. So we're going to be wrapping the y values. So I'm going to save that toolpath now, and I'm going to simply call that y to A, so y to A, and we'll save that onto the desktop. And then I'm just going to pop open that text file now, and we can see at the top is specified the length. We've also got the radius and of course the diameter there. So you can see that those values have all been entered into the top of the header for the G-code file automatically rather than the manual entry of V9. So for VCarve desktop users, it's a much more simple process to what people have been used to with VCarve Pro and Aspire in the past. Okay, so let's finish by taking a summary look at all the new features that have been added to VCarve Pro version 9.5. Right the way from the infrastructure changes that allow us to automatically download and enter our license code to get our software working if we're connected to a customer account. A much better way of managing clip art, i.e. to download it only as and when required. The huge change, which is the addition of the new rotary job type and the related changes both to the workflow and the way we are displaying models. Improvements within drawing for text creation and editing, as well as the new picture editor. And finally the ability to crop a bitmap to a vector. Within modeling, we have a much better way of importing rotary based models and flat based models, as well as support for the wrap model to be exported as a wrapped entity. Within machining, we've got a couple of key improvements to the way we are managing rotary toolpaths, as well as the support for arcs within helical ramps, which should dramatically reduce the size of some G-code files. Overall, I think this represents a big improvement for 9.5 and a great selection of new features that have been added.